There's two ways to look at the question, is democracy over? Firstly, you could ask, have Western-style liberal democracies run their course? History changes. But the second way, probably the way I mean it more in this video, is are we now willing to give up the pretense that we actually have a democracy in the UK and the Western world? Now, I understand that we have a relative democracy. On the one side in the UK, you have a group of self-serving Eton toffs in the Tory party. They may feign some right-wing or conservative or even traditionalist opinion, but ultimately they're liberals and libertarians out for themselves and their friends. Meanwhile, on the flip side, you have the Labour Party, who are basically leftist ideologues who don't know they're leftist ideologues, enforcing their woke utopia while creating a dystopia, but in reality they're not that different to the Tory party. Perhaps this is why we had the second lowest turnout ever in the last election, with many people just not bothering. That's meant that Keir Starmer has effectively been voted in by only 20% of the population. Another major issue was the first past the post system. We had Reform, for instance, who got more votes than the Lib Dems, but far, far fewer seats. But I don't really think that's the problem. The real problem is the huge issues of the day: immigration, identity, belonging. We're not really allowed an opinion on such matters. Members of the Uni Party will pretend that they agree with you from time to time, but in reality we just know they're lying now. They will serve their economic masters in Davos and do whatever it takes to please The Guardian and the BBC and their left-wing social attitudes. Time and again, the British public have voted to limit or even end mass immigration from the Third World, and time and again, they've been ignored. And to rub salt in the wound, we've been told by the liberal establishment that mass immigration wasn't happening, then that it is happening, but it's enriching, so it's good for you, and then that it is happening, but you deserve it because you're a coloniser and too lazy to do the jobs that need doing. Another major issue is traditional values going down the pan. Did anybody vote for this woke madness we have now? The woke takeover of academia, the mainstream culture, sport, work, pretty much every major cultural institution out there. That whole dimension of modern British life seems to be completely undemocratic to me. Left-wingers knew a long time ago they had to do the quote-unquote great march through the institutions, knowing that politics is downstream from culture, and if they could control the culture, they can control the conversation. And while that's happened, we've seen our gates open up to the global marketplace, which has enforced ideas of self-centeredness and greed. It's created a demoralised and atomised society where people no longer feel a sense of purpose or homeliness in their own country. And the one thing that some Brits hold on to is a sense of patriotism that hasn't been quite banned yet, but it is treated as highly suspect by the powers that be. It's like being a white straight male or a Christian. Just keep your mouth shut and keep it to yourself. Now, when you think about all of this together, to want low to no immigration, to want traditional values over woke values, to want British culture to be dominant in Britain is not that much to ask. None of that seems that outrageous to me, but we're told time and again that if we want to keep the economy moving, we need mass immigration. Well, why don't you let us make that call when it comes to the ballot box instead of lying and then doing what you want? Well, the reality is they don't want to put that decision to the public because they know they'll get the wrong answer. They have to serve the globalist economic elite and the left-wing ideology that acts as a sort of super-democratic power in this modern era. This is why when you look across the Western world, from Canada to Britain to France to Australia, everybody increasingly has exactly the same woke politics and neoliberal economics. This is why I often refer to what governs us in this day and age as the oxymoron liberal authoritarianism, although it is true that some groups aren't actually putting up with that. Now, respect where it's due, the religion of peace, despite causing a lot of trouble in the West, doesn't tend to budge on these issues. And what's odd is that the powers that be do tend to leave the Muslims to have their own ultra-conservative values. They'll pretend that they're some ostracised group and they need to be protected, but in reality, if any sort of white European group acted like that, they'd be called toxic bigots and the rest of it. Yet it's with Muslims specifically where we're going to see the first major change in Europe, in my opinion. They're going to be the first group to really push for their own political representation, given they have a different value system and see the world very differently to historic European Christian communities. Just take the Israel-Palestine issue right now. For many Europeans, we don't really want to get involved, don't want to take sides, just stay out of the way. For Muslims, this is the biggest issue going on in the world right now, and that should be reflected in elections. As I've said many times on this channel, lots of Muslims were never going to come to the West and end up listening to George Michael and going to pride marches. The reality is they have their own civilization and their own worldview. And as they start to push for more political representation, I think more and more groups are going to start doing the same. In my view, this was always going to be the end result of the multicultural project. Only a leftist ideologue could think otherwise. The way that this is kept in line by now is by liberal ideology and making out we have a shared enemy, i.e. the evil white straight Christian male, but that also will start to fall in time, and then we'll need an increasingly strong police state to keep order. As I've said before on this channel, I believe that will break down into balkanisation, sectarianism and separate statelets up and down the UK, maybe even across Europe. The reality is, for democracy to work, you need to have a relatively small to medium-sized grouping of people that are cohesive, that talk from the same cultural background. If you have that, it might be able to work. In our modern world, it's being proved that basically we don't really have a say on the issues of the day. Now, as I've said before, I believe there's some darkness coming up ahead of us, but with that will come the opportunity for a new dawn. We're in the birth pangs of a new era, to quote the Bible, and then will remain to be seen what sort of systems we'll live under. We'll have to start thinking about them now, in my opinion. These are just my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.